The racketeering and sex trafficking trial of that man, Keith Raniere, returns to a New York courtroom today. He's accused of being the leader of a sex cult called NXIVM. Of course, they always said it was a self-help organization. Said to have many rich and famous members. This week of interest is testimony from a former member being called Daniella. But it's a great opportunity to check back with Josh Bloch, who's the host and co-producer of the CBC podcast all about NXIVM, Uncover Escaping NXIVM. You can bet he's watching the trial very closely, as so many are, but thanks for coming back today.
Thanks for having me.
We were talking just here in studio privately. I was checking where things are. They should be about 2/3 of the way through. Only about halfway there at this point as it returns to court?
Yeah, it's taking a little bit of time. The prosecution's really allowing the witnesses to give full testimony, and it's a difficult story to tell. So they're allowing people to go back, to explain their full experience through NXIVM. So it is taking a bit longer than anticipated.
Okay, who is Daniella?
So Daniela is actually testifying today. She continues her testimony, and she is a longstanding member of NXIVM. She's a Mexican national, and she says that she was confined to a room for 2 years for committing what they call an ethical breach. And in this case, she had a crush on someone that she was not supposed to have a crush on, someone who was not Keith Raniere. She was one of Keith Raniere, who is the leader of NXIVM, one of his many sexual partners, and one of the conditions of being one of his partners that you can't have another relationship with someone else. So she was confined to a room and eventually was driven to the Mexican border and was left there when she decided that she could no longer handle it.
Okay, we're looking at Raniere with a number of women. Do we know any of those Daniela?
No, the woman that we just saw Keith Raniere with was Nancy Salzman, who is the president of NXIVM, or former president of NXIVM, someone who's actually also pleaded guilty in this case.
Okay. Another woman named Lauren is key, the testimony from her of late, yes.
We heard really fascinating testimony from Lauren Salzman. This is one of the women who was his co-accused. There were 5 women who were all charged and all pleaded guilty. Keith Raniere is now the only person on trial. Lauren Salzman has been part of NXIVM since her early 20s. She was part of the organization for 20 years, was a frontline member of DOS, which is that secret women's group where women were being branded on their body with Keith Raniere's initials. And she has now provided testimony about what was going on, in the inner workings of this secret women's group. And it was very damning testimony. Some people are saying damning testimony because she says that Keith Raniere was the grand master of this group. He had claimed it was not him that was a part of it. It was only being run by women. But we hear from her that, in fact, he orchestrated the entire thing. And it puts him at the top of this scheme, which she says was designed to essentially control women in it.
So as you talk about the testimony, I think we get very clearly the sex trafficking part of it. Why racketeering?
So racketeering is a charge that's normally used to go after organized crime. And the prosecution says, in this case, that this was actually a criminal organization, and they use racketeering as a kind of umbrella charge to show that there's a pattern of illegal activity for this group to control people, to gain money, and to gain access to sex. So it allows them to bring in a whole host of charges against Keith Raniere to prove that there was this pattern of illegal activity within this organization.
So interesting. Do you think we're ever going to hear from him?
That's a good question. I mean, we don't know yet. If he wants to testify, he is entitled to, and he may be the kind of person that would want to take the stand. He clearly has a reputation as someone who can work a crowd, build rapport with people in a room. This is a trial in front of a jury, and he very well may want to take the stand and get up and tell his side of the story, which is obviously a very different side of the story than the one that we're hearing so far that the prosecution is leading.
No wonder you are paying such close attention. May I just give you a bit of a shout out, because there I was looking through the New York Times as I do every morning, and if they don't recommend your podcast, that you should be listening to Escaping NXIVM.
We were very, very honored to be listed there, and we saw that suddenly there was this big spike in our numbers. The podcast was released 8 months ago, and suddenly we saw this big spike because they gave us a shout out.
And it came up in the trial as well?
So it did come up in the trial. Actually, the defense lawyer asked one of the witnesses, have you listened to this podcast? And unfortunately, the witness had not, so we didn't know where he was going.
Right.
But there we got a shout out from the defense attorney as well.
Isn't that kind of bizarre, maybe, to be part of what you're actually covering as you watch. Josh, we'll keep checking in with you as you watch it for us and let us know what we should be paying attention to. It is a fascinating story, and thanks very much for coming back. Josh Bloch, our guest, he's the host and co-producer of that noted podcast, Uncover Escaping NXIVM. You can listen to all 3 seasons, including that episode in particular, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, the CBC Radio app, and one more option for you, CBC.ca/uncover.